Hello, I'm Valentin Mandace from Historic Houses of Romania, Casa de Epoque, and today I would like to present you a very interesting Cold War history sample, if I can put it that way. The building of the former United States Embassy, which is behind me, was vacated following the 9/11 events a few years after, in the aftermath of it, and now it's somewhere at the edge of Bucharest. And across the road is the former association for getting closer to the Soviet Union, ARLUS in Romania, and the acronym de Asociația pentru strângerea legăturilor cu Uniunea Sovietică. You can imagine that in the Cold War times, here was a KGB station spying across the American embassy, which for sure had some CIA agents watching to their colleagues, enemy colleagues on the other side. I put specially these glasses to look a bit as a impersonate Cold War era agent. So it's very interesting in my opinion, this sample of Cold War history. We have to go into the interests of the Cold War history in Bucharest and Romania. Romania was a bit unusual for the Warsaw Pact countries in the fact that it stood as isolated, not agreeing with the invasion of the Czechoslovakia in 1968, and pursuing more or less an independent foreign policy, also not participating into the military exercises of the Warsaw Pact, except at the officer levels. And also the regime pursued closer relations with the United States, which was very keen to make a breach within the Soviet bloc. So the Americans were apparently welcomed in Bucharest, in Romania, in the 1970s and 80s, following Ceausescu's visits to Washington, meeting Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter. Richard Nixon also paid back a visit over here in Bucharest. And the Russians, the relation with the Russians got colder and colder. But nevertheless, we have the ARLUS, the association to getting closer to the Soviet Union, building over here, which obviously had, as I said, some KGB agents. Regarding the architecture, the one behind me is a Art Deco masterpiece. You can see the ocean liner theme by the architect Culture in 1937, while the compound of the United States Embassy was rented up from the Romanian Academy, I think. And it's a complex of villas called Edgar Mavrocordat villas, although I think they are properties from other Romanian aristocrats, which go back from the Belle Epoque in the 19th century, or early 20th century, when the American opened the first legation over here. The stupid Romanian real estate and newspaper sites are saying about this building that is from the 1936, which might be some bits and pieces of it, but that is much earlier, 1920s, before the Great War. And it's another one behind me, which is from the Belle Epoque period. Why they are so interested in that? Because it's for sale at about 8 million euro. Obviously, another kind of real estate stupid stuff in an immature Romanian market. That regarding the architecture from the one behind me, it's a bit more eclectic. La Belle Epoque, Beaux-Arts, things brought together here. The other one is more French style on the other side of the road. But as I said, they were places to spying each other. You see, such a small distance from each other. It was more or less like the Berlin Wall, the Point Charlie, looking at each other from these two buildings. So I think it's an interesting thing to point out this history of the Cold War in Romania and how Romania stood up within the Soviet camp. Also, it's interesting about the isolation of Romania from the Soviet camp and also from the Western world, is that people who were having links with Russia or the Soviet Union were also isolated. For example, this place was a very lively club in the 1950s and 60s, when the relations with the Soviet Union were excellent, and the local communists were very much enthralled with Moscow. But after Ceausescu made this figure apart it became a refuge in a way, especially for women, Russian women. You have to take into account that many Romanian officers went for training to the Soviet Union, and many of them got married with Russian women or Soviet women. They came back over here, and as the policy changed, many of them divorced because obviously it wasn't good for the career. And those poor women weren't welcome back in the Soviet Union, so they were stuck in Romania, and this building was a kind of sorrow club for them to meet and cry on each other's shoulder. Tragic stories from the Cold War on both sides. And the American embassy over here, which in the 1989 was an observation point for the anti-communist revolution, which has its epicenter here nearby. The university is right here at a stone throw away. I was a student there, right there, and I was the leader of my faculty, so very much into that kind of stuff. And during my studies, nearly every day I passed by this street and going to another corp of my university, which is on the other side, doing my geophysical studies. Here, the other building, which is behind me, is a Mediterranean-style 1930s building that was occupied by Romanian Securitate officers, watching both the Russians and the Americans. Typical Cold War. So I hope that you like this more esoteric report from the historic houses of Romania, Casa de Epoca, and we will see each other very soon. Thank you and bye-bye.